This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 625, entitled "No culture that butchers a quarter of its fathers can survive." Description. This flyer shows the horrors of the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts that butcher the lives of one father in 4. These horrors are so great that any culture that is so gender criminal against men cannot survive. This flyer spells out what fundamental changes need to be made in such cultures for them to survive. Since if the gender status quo continues, we will wipe ourselves out. Since the majority of young men see marriage and paternity so toxic that they reject both. Since they see divorce as so toxic, as dictated to them by the hated fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts. And the flyer itself. No culture that butchers a quarter of its fathers can survive. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I have the impression that most people in today's world, that's June 2023, are not sufficiently cognizant of the horror of today's fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system that is butchering the lives of one father in 4. Masculists have an utter hatred of the fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges who commit this massive gender crime against men and aim to exterminate these feminists slowly by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, dying a slow, miserable, manless, loveless, sexless, childless death. Most people, certainly most monoconscious feminists, have little understanding of the enormous implications of the above fact that about a quarter of fathers in Western countries get butchered in the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts. The younger generation of men observe what has happened to their fathers, their uncles, their older male friends, and come to the obvious conclusion that marriage sucks and develop the attitude, fuck marriage, fuck paternity. I'm not going to tolerate a 1 in 4 chance of being butchered in a hated, fluffy, feminist-dominated divorce court system that will treat me as a cash machine to pay for economically parasitic, manslaving, divorce-raping vermin fluffies so that she can live off my money and labour for decades of my life. I will reject marriage and paternity and spend my money on myself. That is, I will choose to live the lifestyle advocated by the MGTOW movement, men going their own way. There are now millions of MGTOWs who see the toxicity of modern marriage and paternity and reject them both by choosing to live a much freer lifestyle, perhaps having a relationship with a woman, in brackets, for example, by latting, L-A-T. T-I-N-G. L-A-T equals living apart together, where both the man and the woman have their own abode, and each is a FIP, F-I-P, equals financially independent person, so that the man is freed from the risk of being butchered in the hated, fluffy, feminist-controlled divorce court system. In many countries now, 2/3 of young men and growing refuse to marry and be fathers, so are obviously crashing the birth rate. But the birth rate crash is merely a consequence of their hatred of the fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts. So the masculists, brackets, men's libbers, who are a lot more political and confrontational than the passive, apolitical MGTOWs, close brackets, see the fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges as indirect genociders, since it is they who are indirectly wiping out whole populations. In Seoul, the capital of South Korea, the birth rate is now a catastrophic 0.7 children per woman, That is a third of the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman needed to keep the population stable. In a mere century, at this rate, Seoul will be no more, since in 4 generations, 99% of its population will have wiped itself out. So obviously something has to be done to overcome this catastrophic situation, which is what this flyer is largely about. In it, I will imagine that I am a male gender politician, the ideological and political leader of the male half of a GEC, G-E-C, that's Gender Equality Committee, that consists half of female feminists and half of male masculists, that deals equally with both gender political issues in parliaments. In reality, I'm no Lenin. I don't have the personality type, the personal skills, nor the interest in political smooching to get political tasks done. Rather, I'm more the Marx type, that is, the theorist who sits in my professorial armchair, literally, and dreams up Masculist, my term, theory, and maps out what gender political steps are needed to solve the above massive problem that is literally destroying our cultures, our populations, because they are literally dying out due to our populations crashing. So, what would my Masculist GEC, G-E-C, policy, manifesto, step-by-step agenda be to get the world back on track? Question mark. The first step is obviously education. Most of the world believes that gender oppression is a one-way street, that is, monoconscious, since for most people, the only gender politics they have heard of is feminist, since the feminists have had a monopoly over gender politics for 6 decades. So to the average person, if you mention the term gender politics, they would automatically, unconsciously think of feminism, since all their lives that is the only example of gender politics that they have heard of. It would not cross their minds that women oppress men too, that gender oppression is a two-way street. So the first main task of the Masculist and of this Masculist gender political leader is to get the Masculist word out, to teach the population, the planet, that gender oppression is a two-way street, and that in reality women oppress men worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men are horrible and last decades, the worst 3 being women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering. Masculists need to increase drastically their numbers so that they can educate society, their friends, their governments, that gender oppression is a two-way street, so that the GECs, GECs, can be set up in the parliaments to implement the necessary political changes in society once most people have been educated into the idea of bi-consciousness, that is, having had both one's feminist and one's masculist consciousnesses raised. Once there are millions of masculists, they can directly confront the unconscious feminist bias that gender oppression is a one-way street by attacking monoconscious feminists who remain intolerant towards the idea of female oppression of men. Masculists, bi-conscious masculists, see monoconscious feminists as hypocrites and bigots, since most feminists are still fluffies when it comes to divorce, behaving as fluffies in their traditional expectations of men, seeing men as cash machines who exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. Masculists harangue such monoconscious feminists viciously and hatefully, labelling them MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, and dump their monoconscious feminist girlfriends due to their intolerance of their feminist girlfriends' monoconscious bigotry. Once millions of monoconscious feminists have been dumped, millions of women will be strongly motivated to become bi-conscious and see that it is in their self-interest to become bi-conscious, since that way they will be much more likely to get and keep a boyfriend. Once there are millions of masculists, they will not only have taken over gender politics on the campuses, crushing feminist monoconsciousness, but they will also penetrate strongly the high schools, where most of the fluffy crapper damage is done. That is, about 80% of young women at the critical age of 16 choose to study fluffy crap majors that will make them fluffies as adults, with fluffy crap diplomas that the economy does not value. So these women will be poor and hence motivated to live off the money and labour of a man, a stupid, gullible, man-slavable man. This is the end of part 1.